perfect family is torn apart when a father's forbidden homosexual relationship with his son's best friend is gradually exposed. Alex Turner, a model police officer, never expected that this dangerous passion would lead to a bloody tragedy. Betrayal, anger, and collapse plunged the whole family into a spiral of death. Alex Turner, a veteran police officer, has witnessed countless stories of people who have lost their way in life. But one thing he didn't expect was that his own story would take a turn he never dared to imagine. His life from the outside still seemed perfect: a family with a gentle wife, a promising son, and a responsible job. However, inside Alex, the emptiness had long begun to gnaw at him, creeping in at moments when no one noticed. Those feelings grew, but Alex remained calm until Dylan, Tyler's old friend, reappeared in his life. Alex had met Dylan years ago on a minor case where the young man had been involved in a violent incident at school. Dylan was a tough-looking young man, but his eyes revealed weakness and conflict. Alex could not forget that look, a look filled with conflict and loss. But it was only a fleeting moment, leaving nothing but a faint mark in his mind. But as Tyler told him about Dylan's transformation, Alex began to remember. Dylan, according to Tyler, had become a different man, a much stronger and more confident version. That transformation, as Tyler described it, aroused a deep curiosity in Alex. Alex couldn't explain why Dylan's transformation had such an impact on him. Perhaps it was because he had seen Dylan's weakness before, and now, seeing him rise from the depths of his life, he couldn't help but be drawn to him. The day Dylan returned to Alex's house, everything began to change in a way Alex never expected. From the first moment Alex saw Dylan walk into the house, he felt an attraction he couldn't explain. Dylan was no longer the weak young man he used to be. He had become a confident man, with a strong appearance and a magnetic presence. It immediately awakened emotions that had been buried deep inside Alex. When Dylan stepped through the door, the change in him was not just superficial. The way he moved, the way his eyes swept over Alex, all contained a confidence, a strong energy. Alex felt uncomfortable, but at the same time could not take his eyes off the boy. Everything seemed to slow down as Alex realized that he was being drawn to Dylan in a way he could not control. In the moments when Dylan immersed himself in the family atmosphere, talking to everyone, Alex stood outside that conversation, but not a complete outsider. He was an observer, someone who deeply felt every little detail, every move of Dylan. He had a strong presence. Every time he walked past, it seemed that the space around Alex became more cramped, and he could do nothing but feel that presence. Alex's emotions became more complicated. He couldn't quite understand why he felt this way, but he knew something inside him was stirring. Maybe it was jealousy of Dylan's youth, maybe it was curiosity about how he had changed, or maybe it was something else Alex had never dared to face in his life. These feelings were growing stronger and more obvious, and as much as he tried to deny them, he knew they weren't something he could easily ignore. After that night, Alex couldn't shake Dylan from his mind. He became a part of his inner thoughts, an invisible but haunting presence. Every time Alex tried to forget, Dylan's image would appear, not just as a strong young man, but also as a symbol of something Alex had never dared to face in his entire life. He couldn't explain the sudden change in his feelings. It wasn't just curiosity, but also a fascination he had never experienced before. Every time Alex thought back to meeting Dylan, he felt his heart beat faster, a feeling that was strange but undeniable. Alex began to spend more time thinking about Dylan, about the life he had lived, and about the miraculous change he had achieved. To Alex, Dylan was no longer just a friend to his son. He became a symbol of an inner conflict that Alex had suppressed for years. The emotions that had been buried deep inside him now rose stronger than ever. In the days that followed, every time Dylan appeared, everything in Alex's life became more complicated. Every encounter with Dylan, even if it was just by chance, left Alex feeling confused and tense. He felt like he was being drawn into a vortex that he couldn't escape, a vortex of being torn between right and wrong, between social norms and secret desires. Dylan, whether he realized it or not, had become the center of Alex's conflict. Every time Alex saw him, he felt more clearly the instability within himself. There was some invisible force that pushed Alex towards Dylan, an irresistible attraction that he couldn't stop. When Alex looked deep into himself, he realized that this was far more than mere curiosity or admiration. It was the awareness of a part of himself that he had never dared to face, a part that Dylan had inadvertently awakened. Alex's life became more complicated with each visit from Dylan. Dylan was not only Tyler's close friend, but also an important presence in Alex's thoughts. At first, Alex tried to deny the strange feelings Dylan brought, but as time went on, he could no longer ignore them. One weekend, When Tyler decided to practice basketball in his private room, Dylan also came to practice with him. Tyler always considered Dylan a trustworthy friend, and the two often spent time together to improve their skills. Alex had intended to avoid him so as not to have to face the confusion in his heart. But that day, Tyler unexpectedly asked his father to help supervise the practice because Karen was busy. Alex reluctantly agreed. He entered Tyler's practice room, a small space filled with practice equipment. There, Dylan was preparing to warm up, taking off his jacket, revealing a strong appearance that Alex could not take his eyes off. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as Dylan and Tyler began practicing techniques that required close coordination. Alex just stood by and watched, but with each passing second he felt himself getting more and more involved in the situation. After a while, Tyler stepped out to get more water, leaving Alex and Dylan alone in the room. The moment was incredibly quiet. There was no more noise from the basketball bouncing off the wall or Tyler's laughter. It was just the two men in a small tense space. Dylan continued to practice alone, but it was clear that Alex was watching. The closeness made all the feelings Alex had tried to hide rise up stronger than ever. Dylan seemed to notice Alex's attention, looking at him with a look that Alex couldn't ignore. It wasn't a casual look, but a knowing one, a quiet but meaningful one. As Alex stepped closer, Dylan handed him the ball to join in the practice. The touch between the two of them, even though it was just a simple movement, was enough to make Alex feel his heart beat faster. Dylan said nothing, but their silence seemed to carry a lot of things that they both understood. As they continued to interact during practice, each movement, each touch seemed to become more meaningful. Even though no words were spoken, the space between them gradually became different. It was no longer awkwardness or embarrassment, but understanding, a connection that did not require words. Their eyes met many times, and in those moments, Alex knew they were sharing something deeper than any words could express. Alex's feelings became clearer after that practice session. The moments when his eyes met Dylan's, the times when their hands accidentally touched during practice, all left an unmistakable feeling in Alex. There was no doubt that Dylan had awakened a part of Alex's feelings that he had tried to hide for many years. Dylan, with his subtlety and sensitivity, did not need to say anything. He also realized the change in the way Alex treated him. The feelings of both of them were no longer hidden, but gradually revealed through every action, every look. Without having to say it out loud, both of them clearly understood what was going on between them. The interaction between the two of them did not stop at physical intimacy, but also emotional connection. They had overcome the stage of hiding and fear, and now both of them had accepted that something bigger was going on. Every time they met, the space between them became more tense, but it was no longer the tension of repressed emotions, but of release. After that practice, everything seemed to change. Alex no longer tried to avoid Dylan's presence. He understood that he could not go back to his old life, where he had to hide his true self. Dylan did not try to keep his distance either. The progress in their relationship had now become undeniable. No longer were there furtive glances or reservations. They had both accepted what they had tried to avoid. The meetings that followed, even if they were just fleeting in daily life, carried the sweetness of blossoming feelings. The touches were no longer shy or rushed, but became understanding and harmony between two souls that had found each other. Every time he met Dylan, Alex felt more true to himself than ever. Dylan had opened a new door for him, where he no longer had to hide, where he could admit the feelings he had buried. The harmony between the two had now become something undeniable, and while the future remains uncertain, Alex knows he has found the part of life he has always longed for. As each day passed, Alex felt drawn to Dylan. His life seemed to be torn in two. On one side was his family, his responsibilities, and his image as a father figure. On the other was his desire to be true to his feelings. The moments with Dylan, however brief, pushed Alex into a maze of emotions that he could not retreat from. More than just physical intimacy, Alex realized that he and Dylan were becoming more and more in tune with each other emotionally. Every time Dylan appeared, his presence seemed to light a fire in Alex that he could not extinguish. But at the same time, the tension inside him also rose, like a string stretched to its limit. Alex could not hide himself forever, and he knew it. One late afternoon, when the house was quiet, Alex realized that Dylan had not left after Tyler went out. The two accidentally met again in the living room, with no one around to interrupt. Their eyes met, this time without any shyness or hesitation, but instead with a deep understanding. There was nothing to hide, nothing to avoid. The space between them became too small to contain the intense emotion surging. The tension in Alex's heart reached its peak as Dylan moved closer. Although neither of them said anything, They both knew what was coming. Emotions had built up for too long, they could no longer be contained. Every move Dylan made, every look he gave Alex was an invitation that Alex could not refuse. He felt like he was being swept up in a storm of emotions, where reason could no longer control it. In that moment, Alex no longer remembered his responsibilities, no longer remembered what he had to keep secret. He could only feel Dylan's strong presence beside him, a gentle but meaningful touch. A simple gesture, but enough to break down all the barriers that both of them had built up over the years. The feelings between them could no longer be denied. Dylan, with his boldness and confidence, pulled Alex out of the shell he had built up over the years. Dylan's eyes seemed to challenge Alex to admit what he had tried to hide. The space between them burned with tension, but it wasn't the tension of fear. It was the tension of desire. Alex knew this was the point of no return. He could no longer back down. That afternoon marked not only an emotional turning point, but also a complete change in the relationship between Alex and Dylan. They were no longer two people who were reserved and afraid of what they felt, but now all barriers were broken. The deep desires that both of them had held tightly now exploded into a fierce, unstoppable flow. Every look, every gesture carried with it a release from the prohibitions they had once set for themselves. The attraction was no longer just a physical distance, but it became an invisible force, drawing them closer than ever. Alex, who had been imprisoned by social conventions and responsibilities, now felt like he had found freedom in Dylan's arms. Everything he had thought important seemed to disappear, leaving only the intense feeling and harmony that Dylan brought. No more furtive glances or secret moments. Everything now became clearer than ever. Every time they met, the tension gradually disappeared, replaced by a silent, deep understanding. They didn't need to say anything, because everything was conveyed through each touch, each lingering look. Alex realized that his life before was just waiting for this moment. The moment he found himself through the empathy and surge of intense emotions that Dylan brought. Since then, their relationship entered a new phase, where all boundaries were erased. There was no longer any hesitation in their meetings, only passion and enthusiasm whenever they were together. Alex no longer felt restrained or trapped by social rules. He found himself in the liberation that Dylan brought, and so did Dylan. The connection between them grew deeper, not only emotionally but also in understanding and spiritual harmony. The relationship between Alex and Dylan continues to grow stronger beyond the limits of reason. They no longer seek safety in the dark, no longer hide from themselves or fear the things imposed by society. Every time they meet, they both feel an unbreakable connection. Emotions surge in every touch, in every meaningful glance, and every time they are close to each other, they feel like there is nothing but absolute harmony. Alex, who used to live within the framework of responsibility and standards, is now completely drawn into the whirlpool of emotions that Dylan brings. He feels like he has found a part of his life that he never dared to dream of. The moments with Dylan are not only physical closeness, but also freedom from all the constraints that have weighed him down for so many years. Every time they met, they didn't need to say much. Just a light touch, a fleeting glance was enough to convey everything they both understood. This relationship had gone beyond the stage of furtive glances or fear of being discovered. Now they just focused on how to enjoy every precious moment together. However, when things became too wonderful, Alex began to notice the signs of something inevitable. Their relationship couldn't last forever in the dark, and Alex knew that at some point everything would be exposed to the light. But every time those thoughts crossed his mind, he couldn't let go of Dylan. The feeling Dylan brought was the only thing that made him feel truly alive. The feelings between Alex and Dylan become so obvious that no one can deny it anymore. Tyler, Alex's son, gradually notices the change in his father and Dylan's attitude. The secret meetings, the unusual moments are too much for Tyler to ignore. He begins to doubt and watch, the pieces gradually fitting together in his mind. Tyler begins to realize the horrifying truth about the relationship that his father is hiding. Everything explodes one night when Tyler, unable to bear the suspicion any longer, decides to confront his father. When he walks into the room and sees his father and Dylan's eyes meet, Tyler knows that what he has feared all along is true. Not only is betrayal something Tyler never thought of, but it is coming from the two people he trusted the most. Rage and disappointment flood his heart, turning into uncontrollable accusations. Alex, standing before his son, had no way to explain. He understood that all the truth had been exposed, and now, not only was he burdened with guilt, but also with Tyler's anger. The relationship between father and son was now on the brink of complete destruction. In a fit of rage and pain, Tyler rushed into a confrontation with his father and Dylan. The conflict was not only an explosion of angry emotions, but also the bursting of all the secrets that had been hidden for so long. Alex, caught between his feelings for Dylan and his responsibility to his family, was torn and could not find a way out. Tyler's anger exploded in the stuffy room as the emotions he had been holding back for so long tried to burst forth. Faced with the undeniable truth, he could no longer contain himself. The betrayal from the father he had admired for so many years and the best friend he had trusted had pushed Tyler to the brink of collapse. Tyler was no longer himself. He charged at Alex and Dylan with angry accusations, not giving either of them a chance to explain. Each of his words was like a knife stabbing deep into Alex's heart. He knew that he had pushed his family into the abyss, and now there was no way to save them. Any explanation was meaningless in the face of Tyler's rage. In a moment of extreme tension, Tyler could no longer contain his outburst. He charged at Dylan, the man he believed had taken his father away from him. Dylan tried to defend himself, but Tyler's uncontrollable anger made him lose control completely. They wrestled in the small space, each punch and scream echoing throughout the house. Alex, watching his two loved ones fight, tried to intervene, but things had gotten out of hand. Tyler's rage was no longer something he could control. In that chaotic moment, a strong push from Tyler caused Dylan to lose his balance, falling towards the bookshelf. Dylan's head hit the sharp edge of the shelf, creating a dry, heavy sound. Time seemed to stop at that moment. Alex rushed towards Dylan, but it was too late. Dylan lay motionless on the floor, blood flowing from the wound on his head, soaking the wooden floor. Everything became eerily silent. Tyler, his anger now gone, backed away, eyes wide with horror at what he had just done. Alex knelt down beside Dylan, his hands shaking as he tried to shake him awake, but the cold silence of the room only reflected the excruciating pain. Dylan, who had become an important part of his life, was now gone forever. Tyler stood there, shaking at the consequences of his uncontrolled actions. He never intended to kill Dylan, but blind rage had pushed everything to an irreversible tragedy. Tyler's eyes were filled with remorse, but that didn't change the painful reality before him. Alex held Dylan, his heart broken. All his hopes, all his desires for a new life, had vanished along with Dylan's. The tragedy had happened, and there was no turning back. All his dreams of freedom, of love, had been crushed. Not only was it an emotional loss, but it was the destruction of a family, a life that could never be mended. Tyler, looking at his father with a blank gaze, could not bear the guilt that weighed on his shoulders. He could not understand how things had come to this, how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The pain of guilt and the horror of what he had done would haunt him forever. This tragedy was not only the end of Dylan, but also the end of Alex's hopes for the life he longed for. But Tyler, who had pushed everything to the brink of tragedy, now had to pay the price. The consequences of blind anger and lack of control made him the cause of this tragic death.